Well, good morning. Hope your Sunday is off to a good start. This morning we're going to talk about Michigan outdoors with someone who has been actively involved for a long time. It starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, our guest this morning has been one of the longest-serving members of the Michigan Natural Resources Commission. J.R. Richardson completed his service on the NRC and took on a new assignment this past December. He's now a member of the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority. He's here this morning to talk about all of that. J.R., welcome back to the Ryan Report.
Well, thanks for having me, Don. I'm looking forward to this interview and really appreciate you allowing us to talk about what we're up to.
It's good to have you back.
Thank you.
You know, we're not going to spend a lot of time on your background because you've been here before, but as I recall, you were born in White Pine.
I was born in White Pine. Not many people can say that, and I go by the hospital every once in a while. I still work up there, so. Yep, I mean, not many people can say they're born in a White Pine hospital, but I sure can.
And you've barely ever left the Ontonagon County area, have you?
Yeah, the only reason I ever left is to go to Michigan Tech, so I went to school at Michigan Tech and got a chemical engineering degree, and at the pushing of my old chemistry teacher, Mrs. Lust, which is, you know, she pushed and pushed. I worked in a paper mill for 2 years in the union, which I thought was really good for me. And finally, she got me to go to school, and I went to Tech and got a chemical engineering degree, and I'm very proud of it. So.
And now you're working with a power generating facility.
Now I work at, work at PM Power Group, which is Porcupine Mountain Power Group, which is very appropriately named, I would say.
Okay. And you really got involved in the outdoors as a young kid, didn't you?
Yeah, my dad was born on the Brule River between Ashland and Duluth, and I mean, you know, it's called God's River and the President's River, and my dad was a canoer and a brook trout fisherman. And ever since I can remember, I was in the front of a canoe or had a fishing pole or a fly rod in my hand, and that's what we did. And, you know, I would feel blessed to have had that, you know, background and have my dad introduce me to that. So.
And how did you ever wind up on the Natural Resources Commission?
Well, it's interesting because Senator Prucy, Mike Prucy, came to me one time in Ontonagon. I had been we had done a lot of really innovative things, anything from building rearing ponds for walleyes in the Bruce Crossing area to doing helicopter plants for brook trout in the Porcupine Mountains to doing habitat work. And we got the Partners in Conservation Award from 2 different parts of the state. At the time it was the MDEQ and the MDNR. And Mike knew that I was real active in that, and Mike suggested that I get on the Natural Resource Commission, which I had never dreamt of or thought of. And I said, a guy from the Western UP, can we do this? And Mike was like, I think we can. And I interviewed, and I think we can.
And now Mike is back involved again too.
And then Mike completely comes around and he's involved again. And you know, he's done such hard work, and he's just a perfect guy for the perfect job at the perfect time. So I'm really glad to see that she brought Mike back, because Mike, if anyone knows the ropes and how to get things done for the UP, it'd be Senator Prucy, and him working with Ed McBroom and all the new legislators. I think, you know, we have a real opportunity to keep pushing forward, so I'm really excited about it.
We want to talk more about the Natural Resources Commission and what you've done there and what's going on there, but I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about this new Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority. Now, you were due to finish your term at the end of December on the NRC, and then you were appointed to this new commission. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I had just completed my last NRC meeting, and I wouldn't say I was ready to go, but I was gonna, I had served my term, and if that was my time was up, my time was up. And then I was at a dinner, like basically a going away dinner, and Director Cray asked me during the dinner if I'd be willing to serve on the Mackinac Bridge Authority. And I said, well, I'd be honored to do that. I mean, obviously, having a person from the UP on that authority to be able to be part of the oversight committee for what's going on the Straits was very important to me, and I think it's very important to the UP and the state of Michigan. So I obviously had to call my boss up first, because I knew it's going to be a controversy. There's some controversy involved with it, and I wanted to make sure that they were all comfortable with that, which they were, and I said, well, thank you very much.
Okay. And as you mentioned, there is some controversy. It's kind of political, and we'll kind of avoid that for now, but what can you actually tell us about this project?
Well, we had a meeting on December 19th at St. Ignace, and part of the reason I was, glad to be a part of this process is when I first came to the DNR, there was, we needed to be more transparent. and we needed more partners. And part of the thing that I want to do with the Mackinac Authority is to bring that transparency and that openness and that partnership idea to this. And we had our first meeting, there was probably 400 people at the meeting, and some for and some against. And our goal was to sit and listen and see if the people, after we talked about what the statute said, did the statute meet the limitations that they wanted it to meet, that it was required to meet? And if it did, and then we heard the input from the constituents in the crowd and the stakeholders, and it had, and then we were required by law to vote for that, and now we're the authority over that. So now all the pieces are getting in place to do the long-term planning.
And not everybody likes the project, but I would say most people probably do, but still some of those have a concern about what happens in the interim, you know, because they're worried about that line.
Sure, I mean, you know, you're talking about the Great Lakes, and, you know, talking about when, you know, lakes, you know, anytime you bring up the Great Lakes, I used to be on the Binational Zero Discharge Committee for the state, and anytime you bring up the Great Lakes, and, you know, you're gonna have, people are very passionate about it, which they ought to be, we all ought to be, and our goal in life is to try to find the best way to do this and do it in the most, you know, efficient and, you know, under budget. And the sooner whatever happens gets done, the better off everyone's going to be, in my opinion. So.
And there is some science involved here, and I think Michigan Tech has done some studies.
Michigan Tech has done done a lot of studies on it. And University of Michigan, one of the other commissioners is Tony England, and he's an Apollo 6 and 13 astronaut. You know, he was, you know, he's very well qualified. He's the dean of engineering at University of Michigan Dearborn. I always say it was funny because we were at in St. Ignace, and we had to give our bios, and I went after him. And, you know, I thought unless I say I walked on Mars, I'm going to be in trouble. And I thought, God, I almost have to apologize for being a chemical engineer, and that's never happened. But, you know, there's a lot of very, very qualified people in there, and we're really looking forward to getting into the oversight of that.
Okay. We'll be back and talk primarily about what's going on with the DNR in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. Our guest is J.R. Richardson. J.R. is a member of the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority, recently served on the Natural Resources Commission. Before I leave the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority, they talk about this tunnel or this corridor being built in bedrock. And I guess, can you give us a better picture of what this is going to look like? Are we drilling a hole in bedrock, or are we building a tunnel, or what's going on?
We don't have all the details yet, so I don't know about, you know, it's supposed to be 100 feet deep, and I don't know all the geology and all the, you know, part of the statute is we have to know all that before we let the bids go and let it go. So, you know, we don't have that all down yet. So after the drilling and the sampling and all that good stuff, we'll know more about all of that. So.
And this will be available for other utilities as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea is one of the statutes is you have to make it large enough so you can look at, you know, anything from broadband to, you know, all the electric power and all the different utilities that could be, you know, bring Michigan together. And I think that's a big part of why it's probably good for Michigan. You know? Let's
talk about your time on the Natural Resources.
And one of the things that is on there that, you know, it's got to be, we have to look at Michigan jobs, and I think it's extremely important that when we do a project of this size, we utilize Michigan workers, and that's one of the big things. Another thing that I want to make sure that, you know, I come from a place where the unemployment's through the roof because of all the down, you know, the mill and the mine and all that stuff, and I want to make darn sure that when this goes on, we're hiring Michigan people to do this. So.
You saw some real change in the public's attitude toward the DNR in your time on the commission, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I always remember, and I tell this story, is one of my first meetings was at the Ramada Inn in Marquette, and I asked one of the bigger guys from Onondaga County to come with me because I was, and we went to the meeting, and I was brought in by 2 conservation officers and two state police officers. And I remember walking in, and they were taking the signs from these people because they were protesting the license increases. There's probably 400 or 500 people at the Ramada. And I said, they can have signs, they can protest, it's America. And they said, oh, JR, they can have the signs. We're taking the 2x4s off so they don't hit you with them. And I'm going like, here we go, you know, and we went from that attitude because people were mad because we had not told them everything about why we needed a license increase, what it was about, where all the money was going, and what then what we did is we went on a mission to make sure it was transparent. And we did things like, you know, the citizens advisory commissions that Stacey Welling runs. So we have an East and West citizens advisory councils, and we did things like UP habitat groups. We reached out to all the UP Whitetails groups. We reached out to UPSA, and we made darn sure that when we started to look at things like license increases, people knew where their money was going to go. And if you do that, and people in their minds can think that it's going to the right place, it makes it much easier for them to accept it.
I know one of your concerns now is about safety too, or what? Or not now, but
it's always. I mean, one of the biggest things is that, you know, making sure when you first getting the younger generation ready to go into the woods, whether it be with a gun in their hand or a bow in their hand, or they're going on a four-wheeler, or they're going on on a snowmobile, that they're safe. And, you know, there's so many volunteers in the state of Michigan that's what they've dedicated their lives to for hunter safety or ORV safety. And I'd just like to thank those people, because getting our younger generation out in the woods and getting them off with a safe attitude is extremely important. And also, you know, like, it just thrills me to no end, because we always talk about getting the kids in the woods. And I had just got to, you know, when I get things in the mail, it's got Michigan Family Friendly Fishing, 14 big gateways across the state. You know, there's one in every county where you can go and bring your kids fishing, and you can go in that county, hit a button, and it says Family Friendly Fishing, and you can go there and you can go to a local shop. They'll give you the poles and the bobbers, and you can go fishing for bluegills in any county in Michigan. And that was something we started, and it makes me proud to think that we can do that, because a lot of times, you know, we'll spend all our time thinking about salmon plants and making big brook trout, and you know, we make it complicated. And the reality of, if you're a 7-year-old kid, you want to go fishing, put a bobber on and catch fish.
Right.
So what we have to do is make sure we have places to do that, easily accessible, and it has fish in it. And I think the more time, we have to spend energy on things like that, not make everything complex, you know.
Just this past week, the MUCC, Michigan United Conservation Clubs, released a study that shows that hunting and fishing has a big impact, over $11 billion and 171,000 jobs directly tied to fishing in Michigan, and that Michigan is the largest employer from hunting and fishing in the Great Lakes area.
You know what? No, just think about that. They use the B word, billions, you know.
Right.
And so we talk about when we invest in Michigan and we take that money from our license fees, or we take our money from, like, you know, Natural Resources Trust Fund, and we invest that into Michigan, the amount of money that flows back into the state. So you know, it's extremely important that we make the resource accessible and make it something that people want to come visit. And you know, it just gulls me to no end to think people fly over, you know, Michigan to go out west to go fishing, when we have probably some of the best steelhead fishing, you know, in the United States, and people fly over us and they don't consider coming here. And what we have to do is make darn sure we make a resource that people want to come to. And
I've got some more questions for you, but we have to take a break. Back with more in just 2 minutes. Again, our guest this morning is J.R. Richardson. Just have a lot of questions. We don't have near enough time. But we have to talk about deer hunting a little. We've talked about that before. Are we back on a good track now?
Well, it seems, you know, it's interesting always when you're making deer regulations that we spend a lot of time and a lot of energy and reach out to a lot of different partners, and there's nothing like mild winters back to back to bring the deer population back. So our deer population was up this year, and the numbers show it. And probably the most exciting thing was, it comes with the worst thing. Worst thing is we found CWD, one case.
Right.
The best thing is that's the only case that we found.
Right.
So, that was a big deal, and we formed a CWD task force in the UP about 3 years ago, and I wanted to make darn sure that it came out of the UPSA with a guy named Mike Taylor and I, and Chairman Ponce was there, and guys like Tony Dembowski, and we wanted to make sure, if we hated the idea that CWD would get up here, but if it did get up here, we were prepared for that, and we would, have our recommendations in place. And one of the things that I know a lot of people are worried about is what the baiting and feeding
Right.
is going to be. And within our recommendations, we have recommended that we have a ban on baiting and feeding within a 10-mile radius of the hot zone. So in every township, you draw a circle, and every township that hits that would have a ban on baiting and feeding. And I want, now instead of fighting with the different partners over what's going to happen with baiting and feeding, we actually had everyone buy into that concept, and that's why we had recommended to the Natural Resource Commission. And I'm also proud to say I shot a 10-point buck on my last year of the commission.
Okay.
So.
You know, it says over the last decade, some notes I've taken, that the DNR has invested over $630,000 on private habitat development in the UP, and they have another $100,000 going out in grants right now.
The deer range improvement project that Bill Scullin runs, and Terry Minzy was his supervisor. I think it's his boss, I'm not sure. But Bill Scullin's running. I've been in on that for years. And I think, it has matching funds, so it actually comes out to like over $1 million worth of habitat in the UP. Right. And there's not one county that hasn't been touched by that. And, that's where your partnerships really kick in, because we'll get together with anywhere from the whitetails of UPSA, or we go to the UP whitetails, or you go to whitetails at Ewan, and they've all done partnerships where we've done acres and acres of habitat land. Yeah. And you can't control winter. We can't control the wolf population because it's federally regulated, but we can do things with habitat. And things like this are extremely important to make sure when the deer go into the yards, come out of the yards, we retain the yards. We have a UP habitat workforce that we've done a lot of work with. Also got a big grant this year. I think their grant was $80,000. Then, we're just trying to work on the things that we can control, and one thing we can't control is that.
And I'll just tell people, if they want more information, they can go to the DNR website and get that, and those grants are available. Okay, you're going off the commission. Dave Nyberg is going to be the only UP member on the commission.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it, and I think about John Madigan when I first got on there, and John was a commissioner, and he was sort of my mentor when I got on, and then we had John, so it's John Madigan and I. Then it was John Matonich and I left John, and John was the chairman as I was on the Natural Resource Commission, and John got off, and then it came to Dave Nyberg, and I couldn't think of a more appropriate person to put on after working with the governor's office, and a true outdoorsman, and he understands how the UP works and how downstate works, and I think that's the type of individual you need, because we came out of 12 years of probably 8 of them were what I call the perfect storm. We had Director Cray. We had a governor that really loved the UP. He came up here many, many times. We had guys like Bill O'Neill was the second in charge of the DNR, and Stacy Welling, and all these, Terry Minzy and Bill Scullin and George Madison, and all these guys who really, really, really are dedicated to the UP. And we made a lot of progress. Now the trick is keep it going and keep pushing, and our voice. You have to push hard downstate sometimes to have your voice heard, and I think Dave would be the right person for the right job. And I think them keeping their citizens advisory panels going, them keeping our UP habitat work group going, CWD task force. We had Snuffy, on there, Al Ettenhofer. They had a CWD task force downstate. They weren't going to put no UP people on there. We pushed, got them on there.
I just know this has been a passion of yours for a dozen years, and congratulations on your past service, and thanks for all you've done.
Well, thank you for having us, and having a forum for us to come out and talk about the resource that we all love just means everything to us, so we appreciate it.
All right. I'll be back with some thoughts on a different subject for you in just a couple of minutes. Well, it's time for another swing down that road that takes us to how things used to be. For some of you, this will stir up a memory, while others may be surprised to learn how things were in the past. Let me take you back to the day when gas stations or service stations were just that. They were gas stations, not convenience stores. They may have had machines that dispensed soft drinks and candy bars, but that was it. They were there to provide gas for your car. And providing gas is something they did very well. Today, when we go to fill up our cars, we pump the gas ourselves. But as many of you will recall, it wasn't always that way. Back in the days when I was a young man behind the wheel, and granted that's a long time ago, when I went to the service station, an attendant, usually with grease on his fingers and an oily rag in his hands, would come out and pump the gas. He'd check the oil and even wash the windshield. And if you were concerned, they would also check your tire pressure. Back in those days, it really was a service station. So when did it change? Actually, it started to change in the late 1940s, but I don't think we were aware of that here. It seems a Los Angeles station owner named Frank Ulrich opened the first self-service filling station. His fuel pumps were run by a computer. The attendant would manually turn the pump back to zero for each customer and take the money and make change. The customer would pump their own gas. The big change started in the 1960s when an inventor by the name of Herb Timm designed a system that enabled an attendant inside the store to activate the pumps outside. This invention completely changed the gas station industry, which could now sell gasoline with a greatly reduced cost of labor. Pay at the pump came along in 1973, although it first showed up in Texas. Not sure when it arrived here. Expansion of the system took quite a while to implement. Most states had laws in place forbidding self-service dispensers in service stations because of safety concerns and fire codes. By 1981, 48 states changed their fire codes to allow individuals to pump their own gas. New Jersey and Oregon did not. Matter of fact, they still have not. Actually, thanks to a new law that went into effect last year, customers can now pump their own gas in Oregon, though only at standalone gas stations in counties with fewer than 40,000 residents. A lot of people in Oregon aren't that happy. They have to pump their own gas. Elsewhere in the state, the ban still holds. You know, the last couple of weeks we talked about customer service. I guess this is just another example of how that has changed. I guess we shouldn't be surprised. As we've discussed before, today you can walk into a supermarket, check out your own groceries, and never talk with a store employee. You just wonder where it all will end. I'll be back in a minute. Time for us to wrap it up for another week. The Today Show is coming up next. Keep in mind you can always watch us on UpperMichiganSource.com. Today's show will be available tomorrow afternoon. Past shows are there now. Thanks to J.R. Richardson for joining us this morning for an update on DNR developments as he completes his long service on the Natural Resources Commission. And thank you for joining us. Let's plan to get together again next Sunday morning.